Oh, and then I'm gonna say, hello, everybody, and welcome to Talk About Music on this beautiful Tuesday where we have summer in November, which is weird, but I'm oddly happy about it because I feel like it's going to be a long winter. And today, our very special guest is Glenn Lewis, who is, full disclosure, an old friend of Greg's. So it was very sweet to join us today to tell us about his wonderful life in the world of opera. So Glenn, take us back when you were a little boy. One day you decided, I'm not going to be a firefighter after all. I want to be an operatic repetiteur and conductor. How did that come about?
Oh boy, it didn't happen when I was 8 years old, I assure you. I did not have an altar to Maria Callas in my bedroom. Um, no, actually, I kind of backed into it almost by accident. Um, in the late 80s, and this is about the time that I first met Greg, um, I had finished my bachelor's and master's in piano. I was a piano performance major and was kind of drifting a bit in living in Chicago and freelancing. And I was doing all kinds of things, everything from, church gig to, but one of the things I did during the day was play for voice lessons for voice teachers in studios downtown in Chicago. And around 1989, one of these voice teachers, a woman named Eileen Deneen, who I adored, she made this suggestion to me, says, you ought to try out for this thing at the San Francisco Opera called the Marilla Opera Program. That is the San Francisco Opera's summer training program for aspiring professionals. And they have 24, 25 singers and 4 coach pianists. And I got the information. I had no idea what I was auditioning for. And they sent me the list of operatic excerpts that I needed to prepare to play and as best as I could sing them. And then also prepare some solo repertoire, and I would work with a conductor a little bit. And so I prepared all of this. I applied, I prepared it all, and I did my audition in Chicago, and I didn't think a thing about it. And then a month later, I got a call from one of their conductors there, and they said they had selected me as one of the 30 applicants to be one of the coaches, one of the junior coach pianists for the program, for the singers for that. And I thought, oh my gosh, what have I gotten myself into? And it meant that in that coming spring, I needed to learn the score to Lucia di Lammermoor and the Merry Wives of Windsor of Otto Nicolai, because those were the 2 pieces that were going to be produced that summer of 1990. So yes, this is now 30 years ago. And so I prepared everything and gee, I'm going to have a great summer in San Francisco. Okay. And I wasn't thinking about anything beyond that. And then realized, hey, wait a minute, I guess I do this pretty well. And, looking for a way to, I'm very fortunate in my life and career that I've never worked at Kinko's, I've never waited tables, and I've never been a barista at Starbucks. Nothing against any of those any of those occupations. They are all noble and necessary. But so I did that, and I did the program, and I played the rehearsals, and all of a sudden I was playing for master classes with Régine Crespin and people like that. And at the end of the summer, we found out that there was this new program at Cincinnati Conservatory in Ohio, that they were instigating a new program for opera coaching and conducting. And one of the people who was going to be in the program dropped out short notice, and this was middle August of 1990. And one of the faculty there called out to San Francisco and said, was any of those people at all interested to possibly take this place? And I didn't have anything specific going on that fall. And I said, okay, hey, sure. And it was a full ride scholarship, everything. And before I knew it, I was moving to Cincinnati, Ohio from Chicago to do this 2-year program. And then once I got into that program, they said, okay, now you need to go and audition for the Santa Fe Opera. And I went to New York. I prepared because I was told that the founding director of the Santa Fe Opera, John Crosby, was a great fan of Richard Strauss's operas. And so invariably he will ask for any Strauss that you have. So I learned 2 arias from Ariadne Athnaksos, and I went and played for him, and then I sight read a little bit. And before I knew it, between in the 2 years I was in Cincinnati, I started my career with the Santa Fe Opera in 1991.
And you've been at Santa Fe pretty much ever since, right?
No, not quite. No. I did 3 summers there. And then in the second summer I was there, one of these things happened that you couldn't plan and you couldn't possibly know about. A fellow had come to Santa Fe in 1992, the summer we were doing Rosenkavalier and Fledermaus. And this fellow was coming from Cologne, Germany, a fellow named David Agler, who he was looking to hire a colleague of mine, one of the other staff people there. But he was the fellow they were interested in actually wasn't interested in going to Europe because he was in a good place with the Canadian Opera and his wife was singing professionally. And so somebody told him, go listen to the piano dress rehearsal of Rosenkavalier because this guy's going to be playing it. So I didn't know he was there. I just went and I played the first and third acts of Rosenkavalier for this piano dress. And 2 days later, he came and asked, his fellow David Agler came and asked me if I would be interested in joining the staff of the Cologne Opera. And so I've always wanted to go to Europe. And not just with a backpack. I wanted to go to Europe. And oh my God, here's my opportunity. And opera is what's going to take me there.
So it's this a series of fortuitous coincidences, huh?
Oh, it all is. All of it is. All of it is. And it took a long time for it actually to come to fruition. But I was in Santa Fe 91, 2, and 3, and then I got the contract for Cologne, and I had to part ways with the Santa Fe Opera, and then I was in Cologne for 4 years on the staff there, and the thing that what got me hired was that I could play the big pieces. I could play the big opera scores. Part of my calling card is playing things like Strauss's Elektra or Salome or Götterdämmerung of Wagner or Otello or Aida of Verdi. The really kind of big scores. And that's been sort of a calling card for a lot of my career, was playing these kinds of pieces. And what I found about opera was that it included everything that I like to do. I grew up with Broadway musicals. I mean, people think it's hilarious that I'm a huge fan of Ethel Merman. And Mary Martin and Angela Lansbury and Julie Andrews and all of these great ladies of the Broadway stage. But opera includes, there's singing, there's orchestra, there's costumes, there's stage, there's drama, everything, it all kind of comes together in opera. And I sort of found my place in it. And I've been involved, not so often, the conductor or the top, I sort of fly under the radar a lot of the time. Mm-hmm. But I'm there. I play things. I've played Salome and Wozzeck for David Robertson, who was the conductor of St. Louis Symphony, and played Peter Grimes for Alan Gilbert. But the most important person I have to say is a fellow named John Fiore, who I met at Santa Fe. And he was subsequently the music director in Dusseldorf, Germany, where I worked, and also in Oslo, and he conducts regularly at Dresden. And he was this guy that sort of showed me how to do this. And so all of these things came together, and I just kind of went with the flow of it. And opera took me to Europe, and I was there for 11 years. And there have been times in the last few years when I've thought about moving back. For potential, you can probably imagine what reasons. And so, but that was sort of the early part. It was a series of coincidences and chances, and one audition here, and somebody heard something there, and I just kind of went with it, and it's been quite a ride for the last, now 30 years.
And then you did decide to come home, and actually, as an aside, next Tuesday I'm going to talk to Daniel Gundlach, who was a countertenor in New York for many years. And when he sort of arrived at a crossroads, he went to Berlin, where he's living now. And we're going to talk next week about, he has a podcast called Counter Melody about great singers of history. So it's sort of a little bit of the opposite pattern of yours. Because he still in Berlin at Disney, I think, you know, so he's been there for, I want to say 7 years or so. So you spent 11 years in Germany,
Mhm,
but then you
mhm.
decided to come back to the US. Tell us why you made, because I remember at the time we talked about, you know, am I going to come back? Am I going to stay in Europe for the rest of my career? What am I going to do? So what were the things you considered?
Well, yeah, that it took about 2 years to make the decision anyways. Um, by 2005, 2006, having been there a decade, um, I was going to have to make a choice. Either I was going to either try to go and become a full-time Kapellmeister, more strictly conducting, or I could stay as a repetitor, a pianist and a coach. Um, but I kind of felt like I had done what I wanted to do in 10 or 11 years there. And the German system is a great system. And people talk about, the bureaucracy of it all and all that kind of thing. But the amazing thing is it produces an awful lot of good stuff. And um, the German system, one of its greatest advantages is that it can because they're heavily subsidized, the companies are freer to do more adventurous repertoire. They'll reach into lesser known repertoire, Baroque repertoire. They'll do more world premieres of things. And sometimes they're great, sometimes they're terrible. But around 2006, when I was turning about 44, I was either going to come home or I was going to stay there for the duration. And I decided to come back partly for family reasons, and I think I'd had enough I'd played enough rehearsals for a style of production I didn't like. Because some people talk about Regie Theater, or if you're being more disrespectful about it, Eurotrash. Um, and there's a lot of controversial staging in Europe. And that's great in a lot of ways because it makes the audience um, makes the audience think, it challenges them. But because opera's been done for 250 years in Europe, people who go to the opera have a reference, they have a point of reference in that they've seen standard productions of most of the standard repertoire. In America, opera outside of the big cities is relatively new. Um, and I decided I wanted to diversify a little bit too. And you can get pigeonholed very easily that what you do is what you do in Europe. And here I have found that I've been able to diversify what I do beyond opera. I play chamber music, I play recitals, I do solo repertoire. So it is, American opera companies, they are not, there's no real, no substantial public support for arts in this country like there are in most European countries. So you have a different set of challenges. But I find now that because I've been based in Pittsburgh for a number of years, and I started back with the Santa Fe Opera in 2005. So between 1993 and 1994 and 2005, I was not with the Santa Fe Opera at all. But it turned out when I came back, there was a place open at the opera, and I've been there every summer except for this year since. So I've done 18 summers with the Santa Fe Opera, and I split my time. And when come around early May, it starts to feel like it's time for the migration to go out to the desert. And at the end of the summer, I'm happy to come back. And then I look forward to going out there again. And I'm hoping that we will be there in the desert next year. And so, and I've had the chance, I've been to the Met in New York. I've been to Chicago, Lyric. I've done a lot of regional companies and and I'm doing more conducting now. But I think anybody who wants to be an opera conductor really needs to spend a lot of time as a repetitor and learn the repertoire by coaching singers. It's sort of the old European model. If you want to be a conductor, a successful opera conductor, you really need to know about voices and languages and the way singers breathe and what do they need on stage and when are you the leader and when are you the follower and all that kind of thing. It's a different thing than symphonic conducting. So, but I'm glad to keep, because I want to keep, part of my time in playing in the piano and also waving a stick. So but I found that I've been able to do it in a certain way in this country that's different than I would have been able to do in Europe.
Yeah, I think, you know, you make a very good point that there's one of the differences is that, you know, partly American opera companies kind of have to fund themselves as they go along. But what that means is, for better or for worse, that there's a different kind of energy about it,
Mhm.
but also that flexibility that you talk about, that most of those companies have to come up with different ways to stay relevant and stay afloat. And I think for the musicians overall, it does mean, again, for better or for worse, greater flexibility. It's probably much more difficult to figure out how to establish full-time employment. But you see a lot of American singers that go and try their luck in Germany. We've had a number of choir members who have, that was part of their master plan was, I'm going to go to Germany, I'm going to get an agent, and I'm going to audition. Can you talk a little bit about what is the typical of experience, would you say, for an American singer that goes and tries that in Germany?
Well, first of all, it's important to know that there's a lot of American singers in the European opera houses, and one of them is because the technical training in the United States is among the best in the world. They come with a stronger technique. They come with a more reliable technique, and yeah, it's you go over there and you write letters to agencies, and in some cases to opera houses directly. To the smaller houses, you can send a letter directly to them saying, I'd like to have an audition, here's my resume. And as often as not, you'll probably get it. If you're going looking for a bigger house, you're going to have to go through an agency. You'll either through a European agency, because they'll have their finger, because you're not just applying for, you're not auditioning for a role, you're probably auditioning for a position in the ensemble of that opera house. And whether you're in Hanover or Freiburg or Mannheim or Stuttgart or Cologne or Essen, you're probably auditioning for a Fach, a voice category. And so they'll be looking not just at are you right for the role that's coming up in their next production. They're looking for something that how many things can you satisfactorily execute in your particular Fach.
Because
So
in general, a German opera house will be a repertory company, right? So
most of them are, yes, most of them are repertoire houses. When I was at the Deutsche Oper am Rhein in Düsseldorf, which is, I think, the 6th largest house in Germany, because it's 2 cities, it's Duisburg and Düsseldorf. We had a repertoire of anywhere from 35 to 40 pieces in a season, and upwards of 280 performances in a season. So you're part of a big factory in a lot of cases. So that's what you're auditioning for. And when you go, and if you get the audition, one of the differences is if you go to auditions in New York City, it's very much like the cattle calls, and there's 100 people there, and they're in and out, in and out. Anytime we had house auditions at the Deutsche Oper, there would be only 3 or 4 people at a time, and they would do it in the early afternoon after morning rehearsals. Then the stage was clear, and the technical director would come and say, how many do we have today? 3. And the crew would take a 45-minute break, and they would come on stage, and each person would sing 2 arias, but just the 3 people. So it's much better. They can actually remember who you were.
Not so overwhelming. You don't have that long line of one, and they all sort of blend in together in your mind.
Right, right. And then you're looking for a position to be part of a house ensemble, which is different than here. Most companies, the people come to whatever city you're in, we do it. We bring people in for each production. We mount the production, and then at the end of the time, everybody scatters to the wind. There, you are part of the ensemble, and one of the great things about that is the members of the singing ensemble get to know each other much better. And one of the things that you can mount a production with star singers. And my favorite analogy is years ago, I saw a production of Rosenkavalier in Chicago with Kurt Moll, Anna Tomova-Sintov, Anna-Sophie von Otter, Kathleen Battle, which is pretty high flying casting. And it was great. But now we had in our company, Artur Korn, who was the guy you got if you couldn't get Kurt Moll. You had Gene Pylant, Marlis Peterson, who has recently been the sort of reigning Lulu in the world. She was Sophie, and one of our best house mezzos, Annette Zylkin was the Octavian. And so while the thing you get is these people know each other on stage. They know how they work together. They've done many productions together. So there's a cohesion about these productions as opposed to, oh, we're doing La Boheme and Mimi and Rodolfo met a half an hour ago and they're going to do a love scene. So there are trade-offs about that. And of course, the other thing is that the orchestras know the singers really well too. They get to know them. So it's not just the next set of guests comes in. You have the orchestra, and they're very interested in it too, because usually the city's symphony or philharmonic orchestra is also the orchestra for the opera house, for the opera pit. So it's a great big set of gears that all have to turn, because at one, there may be a concert at the symphony hall where the orchestra is playing. They're going to play, I don't know, Beethoven Symphony, Tchaikovsky Symphony, something like that. The opera, they're playing the Marriage of Figaro, the other contingent of the orchestra, and it all rotates.
There we go. So it sounds like it was quite a big change to come back and settle in at Pittsburgh after being in that kind of an environment for so long.
At first, I was uncertain about it, but you find, in the years I've done all this work in all these different places, I've seen the advantages and disadvantages of both systems. And there are advantages and disadvantages to both the state-supported system and the privately supported system. And there really are they're very different. But the thing I think over many years now, because I've worked in at places like the Met in Chicago, and I've done regional opera, and I've worked in Europe, and I've worked in academia. The thing you can't predict is, where is a cast going to gel? Where is a cast going to work really well together with the conductor, with the director? When is it going to work? And I'm some of my most memorable productions came out of academic circumstances. And then, I've done Tosca several times. But I'll tell you, we had a moment last year. I did Tosca, worked on a Tosca in San Antonio, Texas. And that's a company that's trying to rebuild itself. And they did a production of Tosca, and the second act scene where Scarpia and Tosca are, they're having their fight there. And they played it so powerfully that the moment that Tosca stabbed Scarpia at the end of the second act, the audience started cheering and applauding. And then the second time she stabbed him again, and they cheered louder.
They're a very murderous crowd down there, apparently.
No, but it means they're engaged.
Absolutely.
They're engaged in it. They're in it at the piece that it caught them. And then I remember doing, we had moments like that in, my most memorable thing probably from my time in Germany is we did a guest production at the National Theater of Prague in the Czech Republic. And we brought our entire Wagner Ring cycle to Prague. And we brought our soloists, our production, but their orchestra, their chorus for Götterdämmerung, and their ensemble members as the Valkyries in Die Walküre. But what was extraordinary about the whole thing was, what we didn't know when we got there, was that this complete ring cycle was the first complete ring cycle in the Czech capital since 1938.
Wow.
And this was 2005. They had performed Das Rheingold and Die Walküre, but the complete ring had not been done in the Czech Republic. And my God, did the orchestra step up? They asked for additional rehearsals. They wanted additional rehearsal time with the conductor. And I'll tell you, almost more than the performances, the final dress rehearsal, people were practically hanging from the rafters to hear this. You had the students and members of the ensemble, and the whole cultural community of Prague was there. And by the way, 6 weeks in Prague is a really great thing. We did 2 complete cycles with different Brunhildes for each one of them, which made it even more entertaining. And so you never know whether something like, oh, they're cheering because Tosca stabbed Scarpia, or we're involved in this huge cultural, and it's, this is 2005, and there's still sort of the cultural exchange between the former Eastern Europe and Germany, and all that sort of uh, coming to terms with history and all that kind of thing, was really exciting. So you never know where. And here in Pittsburgh, I've had some really great experiences, both conducting and playing. We've had some wonderful productions here. And like I say, you never know where everything's going to gel together, because opera has so many moving parts. It's hard to get everything working exactly right all the time.
And it's an awfully big machine. So that sort of brings us to our current predicament, because all, opera companies, maybe more so than just about anybody else in this situation, are faced with that whole planning, that because it's such a big operation, typically things are scheduled years in advance.
That's
People
right.
are booked. You have to build sets, you have to budget and all that stuff. So how are you guys pivoting? Seems to be the word of the year, right? What have you been up to? I saw you guys did Così fan tutte and
Yes, we did.
stayed safely apart for the whole. So
Yes,
how
we
did you
did.
manage all of that? Tell us about the excitement.
Yeah, well, it was really exciting and a huge challenge. To start with, one of the things that we have working for us here, specifically in Pittsburgh, is that we own an industrial factory. Our building in the Strip District of Pittsburgh is the former Westinghouse air brake factory. So we own a building that's a city block long. And what that means is when we start talking about social distancing and spacing, we have a big enough space. We do all of our rehearsing in this space. We have two full rehearsal stages. We have our wardrobe, costumes, administration, everything. It's not where we do our performances regularly, but it's where we prepare everything. And our smaller productions get done there. But we were able to properly distance on a seating bank 50 audience members. The cast of Così fan tutte is 6 people. They sang with masks on, specially constructed masks that had a kind of ribbing around the front, so when you breathed in, the cloth wouldn't go in your mouth. And then the orchestra was seated behind them, properly distanced. Everyone's was spaced out with the proper distance. And one of the things that meant was that each string player had their own music stand. So they weren't sharing music stands. Each one of them had to do their own page turning, which is unusual. We also reduced the orchestra. We had a 17-piece orchestra for Così. We went with single winds and reduced strings. The regular orchestra is about 35, but we managed to get full sound together. And we were all going into crazy territory, but every step of the way, every safety measure, health measure was conferred with the Pennsylvania Department of Health. And one of our board members is an epidemiologist. And so all of these resources were brought together and says, well, let's try this. And we were told from the get-go, if anybody gets sick, we're off. We're done. It's not going to happen. If one person is diagnosed with COVID, then not going to happen. So through everything, every rehearsal, masks, social distancing, our resident artists, each one of them had their own music stand with their name on it, and no one else was allowed to touch it.
Did you do multiple performances, or was there a live stream component to it as well?
We did 6 performances, and we live streamed the Friday night, the 3rd performance. We live streamed it. Yes, with cameras. We're getting pretty good at this now. We're actually with three cameras, so it's not like they just set a camera at the front of the stage and let it go. They did camera angles because they rehearsed it all through the dress rehearsals to get the proper angles. And they still, sometimes we always have super titles for opera now. Sometimes the titles were above the singers, sometimes they were below the singers, depending upon where they were in the action.
So whole level of production that all of a sudden comes into play with.
Yes, all this videography and all these kinds of things. But everybody was really jazzed to be part of it because people are just anxious to get back to doing this. Now, the other thing we did is we created a 90-minute version of Così fan tutte, because the piece with normal intermissions runs about 3 hours and 20 minutes. So we made a 90-minute version, which preserved the story, preserved all the really good arias and the best ensembles, so people would get all the best bits. and tell the story in a much faster fashion. There was no intermission. It was 92 minutes long. And we got rave reviews for it. Now we have the tally on how many people actually tuned into it. And the best way to describe it is how many screens did we get? Because you don't know if somebody tuned in at someone's house, you don't know if there's 3 people watching or 4 people or 2 people or what. But between our platforms on Facebook and on YouTube, we had 4,400 views.
Wow, that's exciting.
4,400 partial or complete views of the piece. And we found if you go beyond 90 minutes, you're starting to get long for a live stream.
Yeah, I have a hard time sitting in front of a computer very long. So
Right.
I
Well,
understand that.
what we were encouraging people, because I mean, a lot of people who are much more technically savvy than am I said, so you hook this up to your big screen TV, right? And then you get your wine and cheese or your beer and pizza or your wine and pizza or your beer and cheese, whatever you like, and make an evening of it. And
Or with popcorn.
or popcorn, yes, which you wouldn't annoy your neighbors who are seated next to you.
The best of all possible worlds.
Yes, and it was an actually beautiful production that was set during the Spanish flu pandemic in an Italian munitions factory at the end of World War I.
So relevant.
Dorabella and Fiordiligi were factory workers. And as you know, in wartime, women were working in factories. They were building, in both World War I and World War II. That was one of the great changes, was that women were working in factories, and their boyfriends, Ferrando and Guglielmo, worked there too. And they left and went off to war, because it's 1918. And then they came back, and I'm not sure whose idea it was to make them Scottish, but they were in tartans, they were in kilts when they came back as the Albanians.
There we are.
But it had a real sense of humor about it. And we also, well, to be perfectly crass, we also were able to expunge a few of the sort of more misogynistic bits of Così fan tutte, which it is certainly known to have. But we found that this was when everything was said and done, and it required reorchestration, we had to rescore it. We had to rewrite some of the recitatives to make them harmonically fit from one number to the next. But we were really kind of proud of how it turned out. It really
sounds like a great success. So what's next? What must inspire you to the next?
Well, the company has announced 4 productions this season. The next one is a piece for solo baritone called Soldier Songs. And what it is, it's about an hour long, and it's a series of vignettes of a man's life from when he's a young boy to when he's almost 80 years of age. And what it is, at the beginning, he's a young boy playing with his toy soldiers. And then he's a little older and playing with his video games. And then he's a little older and he's actually enlisted in the military. And then he actually sees combat. And then it's later after he retires. And then you find out that later in the another sequence that his son has been killed in combat somewhere. So it's a whole sort of span of a lifetime in a series of songs. And it's for our resident artist baritone. I should say the cast for Così and for all of our productions is our resident artists. We have 6 vocal resident artists this season, 2 sopranos, a mezzo, tenor, baritone, and bass. And this will be our baritone, Yazid Gray, who's a terrific young baritone. And then after that, in the spring, we're going to do a similar thing. We're going to do a streamlined version of Handel's Semele. Again, now this is quite a pageant, so we're going to be cutting it down to the main story of Jupiter and Semele and Juno and Athamas and all of that. And that'll be also done as 90 minutes with a Baroque orchestra. We will have, as we often have, we have a wonderful ensemble here in Pittsburgh called Chatham Baroque, and they will form the core of the Continuo group with violin and viola da gamba and the theorbo, which we all love to hear. And we'll be doing again with a small, Baroque style orchestra, and it will be about 90 minutes long, again with our resident artists. And then the final piece is what we were planning to do anyways at the end of this season, which is Yardbird, which is a story of Charlie Parker, the jazz saxophonist. The piece was premiered with Lawrence Brownlee, the amazing tenor. He was driving force behind that, and we will be presenting that in the spring. Again, smaller circumstances. These are all small orchestra, but live. But we are hiring orchestra members, so some people are working, because there's an awful lot of out of work. You know, you only have to see what's going on at the Metropolitan Opera and the Lyric Opera Chicago. How many people are not working at all?
Well, kudos to you for finding a way forward. And sounds like an interesting exercise, is this whole distilling an opera down to, as you say, the basic story, and how can you still have something satisfying
Exactly.
at a shorter and smaller format. Ray had a question for you.
Yes.
Ray, tell us. Oh, yeah, you have to
unmute.
Yeah, unmute yourself. There you go.
You spoke of this piece you're doing for your baritone. Last year, were you involved in Eric Fering's Winterreise project?
Tangentially, one of my colleagues actually conducted that.
Really
what did we call it? It was because they had to change the name.
Yeah,
they had to change the name of it. It was it was based on the composer Douglas Cuomo translated the poems of Winterreise, Schubert's Winterreise, into English, and made a kind of a 45-minute soliloquy about it's Schubert. It's about a lonely gentleman.
it was definitely a different characterization, and but it was really effective. I thought. I'm prejudiced because I like Eric, but
Well, indeed,
Eric is one of our former members.
It's been brought to my right
with Glenn.
Well, yes, and I was going to say that Eric Fering, who did that, you were at King's Chapel.
Yeah, well, he was studying at the Boston Conservatory.
And I'll tell you, I'm kind of heartbroken, because this summer in Santa Fe, Eric Fering was supposed to make his debut as Tamino in the Magic Flute at Santa Fe, and the guy who was going to be Papageno was Ben Taylor, who was also one of our resident artists for 2 years. So we were like flipping out that we were going to have both the first cast, Tamino and Papageno, were coming from our program. And so, but yes, Eric, he did that. It was this monologue, 45-minute monologue. It's set in a kind of a sleazy motel room.
it was very effective.
Yes.
And I enjoyed watching it.
And we were surprised about, the origins of it, because Douglas J. Cuomo, he's most famous for writing the theme music to Sex and the City. With that in your head. So yeah, but we've done any number of contemporary operas here. We've done Nico Muley's Dark Sisters and Greg Spears's Paul's Case. We do a lot of these here. I'm very pleased that, as we are able to we hope to try and please both of our audiences. We have the traditionalists who want Verdi and Puccini and Donizetti, and then there's people who don't want to see that anymore. They want to see Benjamin Britten, and they want to see newer pieces, and you always, I wish we could get both camps to come together a little more sometimes. But I'm glad that you were able to see it.
That's the nice thing about many of these projects. It sounds like, we can see them even from Boston now. It's a flip side of COVID.
And we found out that a big percentage of our live stream, we had people in 21 states.
Wow.
Watching the live stream of Così fan tutte, and we even had people what we got the information today from Germany, Argentina, and Brazil. So,
Pittsburgh International, I tell you, take over the world.
Well, and what it also does is we get a number of people who've never seen an opera before, which is among younger people too, which is a great thing. These are all reasons to be hopeful. And so, again, we were always on a knife edge. If somebody gets sick, sorry. Exactly. But so far, we take every precaution you can possibly imagine. In our normal day, our administrative people are in from 9 to 1, and the artistic people are in from 1 to 5. Sorry?
All stay healthy, please.
That's what we're trying to do.
Yep. Any other questions for Glenn? Of course, as usual, we've gone over time already, but I'm happy to take
Oops,
questions.
sorry.
But anybody has something to add?
I just think it's maybe a silver lining here that because of the limitations of the COVID pandemic, companies like yours are being required almost to come up with creative solutions. And even if that involves slicing up the works of art. I know years ago in Young Audience, we pared it down even more draconianly, and it wasn't nearly as grand a scale, but the fact that it makes you think about what's essential to a plot, to a score, or whatever, and to recombine those things in an effective presentation. So I applaud you for being so successful with that. So keep up the good work.
Well, thank you. And the other thing is that actually the smaller companies can pivot more easily than the big companies. And you're trying to turn a huge ship like the Lyric Opera of Chicago. That's a hard thing to do. You've got so many people involved. Our full-time staff is 25 people. So we are able to pivot and adjust faster. And I think, so that's you know, Atlanta Opera has just done their Kaiser von Atlantis in a circus tent outside.
Ooh.
They've just done that, which requires other kinds of technical skills.
And clement weather.
Yes, indeed. Well, it is Atlanta. We have a better chance. So I'm sorry, Allison?
Yeah, my question is, and kind of a big question, so completely understandable if it needs to be tabled, but I'm kind of curious kind of what your experience has been working with the cities of Pittsburgh versus Santa Fe in terms of like how they're, you know, how encouraging or how restrictive are they being, you know, with arts organizations throughout the pandemic?
Well, what happened, it happened, you know, Friday, March 13th is at the Cultural Trust of Pittsburgh, which oversees all of the venues downtown. It oversees Heinz Hall, where the symphony plays, and Benedum Centers, where we play and where the touring Broadway shows come. They reacted really early and pretty strong. They just shut it all down. And fortunately, we've had relatively low COVID numbers in Allegheny County. As a part, some people complained about that, but we're a little less strict. Now, Santa Fe is a completely different creature because they you know, it's a summer thing. People come to Santa Fe 9 months out of the year. Santa Fe is a very pretty, but a small capital city town in the middle of the desert. It comes alive mostly in the summertime when the festivals are on and everybody comes, and you know, the population doubles and everybody comes there. So they weren't dealing with that kind of thing, but they said the opera can't perform, and and that was a horrible decision to make, because between the Santa Fe Opera, the Chamber Music Festival, and everything else that goes on down there in the summertime, it's worth $200 million to the local economy. And so that's a hard decision to make, but they did. And as a result, they have announced they're going to go ahead with a smaller, a more reduced season next summer in Santa Fe. But you find in both cases, on the mayoral level and, you know, health department and all of that, they've been very cooperative, because we've come at them with honest, you know, we've done our due diligence and our homework on in any of our proposals that we gave to authorities about it. They've been very cooperative. So we're, you know, and that, yes, everybody wears a mask, and Fiordiligi had to sing all of her arias with her mask on, which was an amazing feat. So we were optimistic, very, very carefully optimistic that this is a way to maintain things until we get something closer to normal.
Better days ahead. Well, congratulations on all your success and the wonderful work you're doing.
Thank you.
Pittsburgh and taking over the world. Thank you so much for coming to talk to us today, Glenn. Thanks everybody for attending, and I will be back next Tuesday. Thanks,
okay.
everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Glenn.